Sam knows the place, and thank you for coming and enjoying our house concert series here. We've been doing this, I've been presenting for 29 years, and it's been a real joy and to do this with all this different stuff over the last 25, 30 years, so it's pretty great. Made friends with Erik some years ago, and we've been pretty fast friends for a long time. I've seen him play in every different band. And he's a great storyteller, so I'm going to let him tell most of the stories because they're pretty amazing. And so we've been talking about having a solo performance, and voila, we have a solo performance by Erik Lawrence.
Thank you. This is Tom. He's the owner of the pop shop. In my world, that means he's providing a huge service to us. And boy, I've played solo concerts before for a really, really long time. Going back a really long way, but I don't get to do it that often. And what I do get to do is play in a lot of situations with a lot of different people, and some of them have just been incredible experiences. So to get one thing out of the way, we're celebrating 4 birthdays today of amazing jazz musicians. One of whom, is special mention, Charlie Parker, Yardbird, the Bird, the great alto saxophone master of bebop, who was actually born on the 29th. Today's the 27th for those of you who are still in your weekend mode. And but on the 27th, we have Lester Young, who we're just listening to, and we might just hear a little bit more of him in a moment or two. And then 2 masters of a little bit more modern, avant-garde, creative, expressive jazz. Alice Coltrane, who is the second wife of John Coltrane, an incredible pianist and harpist and composer and band leader, and a mother of some amazing Coltrane children, including Robbie Coltrane as a saxophone player, and Sonny Chirac, who is one of my true up front and close avatars. Sonny was a master jazz guitar player who came up in the 1960s. He sang in doo-wop bands until he was about 21 years old, and he grew up in the small town of Ossining, New York, which is right on the Hudson River, sort of, I'm just trying to think, just south of the Bear Mountain Bridge, I would say. Not, somewhere around there. And, or maybe, 10 minutes north of Tarrytown by the Tappan Zee, the all-new Hugh Carey Tappan Zee Bridge. And I'm from Nyack, which is on the other side of the Tappan Zee Bridge, Hugh Carey Bridge. But Sonny was an incredible spirit, and he had a huge influence on me because he was probably one of the least understood musicians of his era. He played a style that people just couldn't really understand because a lot of it sounded like noise. He was, in some ways, a contemporary of John Coltrane and Pharoah Sanders and all these avant-garde saxophonists. And another person you could say he sounded like was Jimi Hendrix in his rawest form. Somebody went to see him play in the 90s with me, another great jazz guitar player, modern guitar player. And he walked out of the place laughing, like holding his head, and he'd never heard anything like it before. He says he sounds like a really, really stoned Jimi Hendrix. But that doesn't really do him service because I was with him in 1990. He passed away in 1993. And I was telling Tom, Downbeat magazine was the jazz magazine of the, pretty much the 20th century. And once a year, all the jazz critics would do a poll, and then they would give an award to established artists. So like on guitar would be George Benson or somebody famous everybody heard of, and then give one called Talent Deserving Wider Recognition. And when I played with Sonny in 1990, he was probably in his late 50s, and I opened up Downbeat, and he had won Talent Deserving Wider Recognition. He had just had this huge resurgence. He did a solo guitar album. He did the soundtrack to a crazy TV show called animation called Space Ghost Coast to Coast, and he did a lot of tours in Europe and stuff like that. And a lot of the younger avant-garde musicians really revered him. And, so they sort of held him up on a pedestal, as they should. And so I called him up to congratulate him. Hey, I just got downbeat and you won, in case you didn't know. And he laughed, and he always laughed. He had a really infectious laugh, and that joy existed in his music, even though it wasn't like anything he'd ever heard before. And I said, what's so funny? And he said, I won that same award 20 years ago. So I grew up in a jazz household. My dad was a great jazz saxophone player. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I had this huge collection of Downbeat magazines, and I went back to the Downbeat from that month in 1970, and I pulled it out, and sure enough, he won in 1970. And there was an interview with him with a guy who now is one of the top jazz radio guys in the world. And Sonny says, I played with Miles Davis on Bitches Brew, which is one of the most famous modern Miles Davis records. He played with Herbie Mann. He played with a few other people. He played with Wayne Shorter on the Supernova record, with John McLaughlin also on guitar. And he said, and people were still asking me to prove myself, and I decided I'm not going to play for anybody else anymore. I'm just going to play for myself. But realistically, I don't think that the public is really, or the critics are ready for what I have to play, and probably won't be ready for another 15 years, and which was just about exactly right. And the interviewer said, so what are you going to do for the next 15 years? And Sonny said, I'll probably just sit home and watch TV. And which is funny, except it's exactly what he did, but he watched TV with the sound off, and he just played guitar nonstop all day for 15 years. So then when he got that next call, I mean, if you listen to him now, we're still not ready to listen to him because you don't really have a frame of reference for how advanced he was. But an artist like me, I admire him because he didn't wait for people to be ready. He just went as far as he could possibly go. And there's some artists like that, like Sonny Chirac and Eric Dolphy and Ornette Coleman and other folks who they just have to lead the way. They're not looking for followers. They're just playing what they really, really have to do. And I respect that so much about him. And the first time I ever went to Europe to play a festival was in 1990, and I went with Sonny Chirac. And it was this weird hybrid because before he played guitar, he didn't start playing until he was 21 years old. And he was so influenced by John Coltrane. He couldn't play the sax because of a breathing problem he had. So he wanted to play what Coltrane could play on the sax. And he invented a new way of playing the guitar. It sounded something like noise, but he was trying to get those crazy sounds that Coltrane could get. And we were backstage after our sound check, and we were listening to these younger, now they're older, but younger avant-garde players, Elliott Sharp and John Zorn and all these guys. And they were so excited they literally would sit at his feet when every chance that they got. And then they went out on stage to do their sound check, but they knew that Sonny Chirac was sitting backstage, so they really turned up the burners. And excuse me, Sonny and I looked at each other, and we both had the same thought: this sounds like absolute garbage. And I looked at him. I said, I'm ready to go back to the hotel. Are you? And he said, yeah. And I said, Sonny, what is it? Because I'm younger than those guys. I said, what is it? What's going on here? He said, when we started the freedom movement, which is what they called the John Coltrane's last era, and the musicians like him, and he said, when Pharoah Sanders and I started the freedom movement, what we wanted to do was express the beauty and the love that was always amidst the chaos of that avant-garde music. And these guys have the noises that we were making, but the beauty inside of the chaos isn't really there. And I always remember that that was a huge influence for me. And, since then, I haven't just played, ultra creative jazz. I've toured with Buddy Miles from Jimi Hendrix's band. I toured with Levon Helm from the band. I played with the band, and Bob Dylan, and, all kinds of Aretha Franklin, and all kinds of people, you name it. I'm not trying to drop names. I'm just saying my concept is really wide open. I really, I may be one of the few people who play in this shop, which is an honor to play in this shop, because I know the names of other people who played here, and it's incredible, who might be on a record in just about every single category of the shop, which is that's what I want to accomplish in my life, you know. But and I think one of the lessons I also learned from Sonny was that we were playing doo-wop, and it was an avant-garde jazz festival. And in fact, earlier today, I was wearing a T-shirt that said Saalfelden, August 25th to 28th, 2016. I realized I played there 1 year ago today. It was this next time I ever played at that same festival. And you're in the Alps in Austria, and it feels like the sound of music. You know, like you're living the sound of music, except the sound is avant-garde jazz, which to me is just pure beauty. And Sonny had a way of combining how he played, which was crazy and frenetic but beautiful, with the music that he loved to sing, which was doo-wop, which is like music from the 4 and 5 part harmony music of the 50s. And all these guys who were like these super ultra advanced improvising musicians were on the side of the stage line dancing it and really into it, because that was the music of everybody's heritage. And the thing that I try to preserve is the fact that no matter what kind of music I play, it's rooted in deep soul. It's rooted in the blues of the African diaspora, which obviously is not my diaspora, but it's the music that I've heard since I was a child. I didn't listen to Pat Boone and and that kind of stuff. You know, I was listening to, my father was playing with, Booker Irvin and guys like that, Clifford Jordan, and that's what I listened to. You know, he played with Charles Mingus and Dizzy Gillespie and Clark Terry. I've got pictures of me at 8 years old sitting on Clark Terry's lap. So that music, I can claim some of it as my own. And I'm not saying that everything I play is, has to be that, but it's what I try to do is get a beautiful sound and rooted in soul. So, long introduction. I have a lot of ideas of things that I love to do, and I'm going to start with a little tribute to Lester Young, and we're going to do this in a kind of a unique way. So here's this. I figured this out.
You like that kind of music?
I do, Fred, but I mean, it's kind of over my head,
Over your head or under it?
This is Lester Young being interviewed in 1951.
But it's nice, I reckon. But I can't get at that rhythm that goes like that.
A shuffle rhythm.
Yeah, that's the only thing. Other than that, I could make it, if it was straight rhythm,
Yeah.
something like that. But that, yeah.
I'll tell you in a minute.
No, well, Press, I mean, just give them a number. The way I would say it. Yeah. Yeah. I thought all of it was nice, just other than the rhythm that today would have been much better if they, hadn't I had that kind of rhythm, just straight line, get it like that. It's real crazy. I like it. I think I heard it once in Chicago. I'm not. The only thing I would say would be Woody Herman or either Stan Kent. That's about my best bet. No, I don't know the name of the tenor player, but it's crazy the way the arrangements and things are. I think it's real great. I go like that. In fact, I'm gonna get the address from you so I can get the record, Okay. Sure.
Oh, you'd be surprised again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll go for that too, I like it because we played in Chicago with my Distillery. It was whaling with the Distillery, So, people like things like that is real nice. So I think it's crazy too. Sure. Who's that? Your favorite? Yeah, I thought it was nice when I got the singing and thing. Yeah, I thought it was real nice.
That style of tennis
The straight hand? Sure, and all the time it used to be Buck Freeman, and he used to play the Johnson
yeah,
or something like that. And I used to hear him and he used to play those records and things like that. Nobody ever played like him, so I like a stylist.
yeah,
You know? So it was a style of his own. Sure. Like that. It was wrong, so I think you could say nothing, but it's nice. You know. I think that on the Dixieland, I think. Hey, too. That's nice, huh? Yeah. All the way. I think that's real nice. I don't know the band or nothing like that. It's beautiful music, you know. I like that too. Yeah, well, I don't know what it is, but I think it's so pretty. No, I never been into that. Into the classical, you know. Yeah. So I wouldn't know what to say. Very few records I've heard, because I never done that beat, you know. Yeah, I'd give them 4, whoever it is. I don't know who the band is, but I'm sure it's pretty. I'm gonna try to get the record too. Right?
yeah, the only one he discussed was the trumpet, I think. You know?
The trumpeter was playing on there?
Yeah.
Well, I think I would go like just one, and I'd say Al Killian. No, other than that, I'll put it down.
What do you think Coleman Hawkins on record?
Oh, well, I have to. That's my people, you know. So I have to say, that's my great big eye.
You like the, I know what I want to ask you. What do you think about the general new school of the tenor man? All these people like the Four Brothers and all this, the whole
Everybody will ask me that. Well, I'll tell you. Well, they just fascinate me, you know? Because I hear little things that I've played, you know. And it just knocks me out. Things like that.
You like the way tenors?
Sure. I mean, I always liked it like that, you know what I mean? Because when I first came to New York, you know, I got bruised because I didn't play like Coleman Hawkins.
Yeah.
I used to get a lot of teardrops behind that. But I mean, I say, well, you know, some people just don't have eyes for certain things. So, that's the way you feel, and I hear when people playing like that, I go and buy their records too and things and sit up and listen. They knock me out, you know?
What records do you like?
Records? Well, just the ones I like. Same way like you playing that, if I hear one, I like it. Or something, or they play one over the radio or something, I'll go and get it or something like that. I like to be like, mostly like a variety, you know, I wouldn't like to get hung up with one thing, you know? So, that's why I speak like that.
You know, I think it's quite a wide variety. Almost all of it.
That's right. Just all music, and all day and all night, music and things, you know? It's just like that. Record?
Yeah, like the thing that you would want to get 12 stars to, you know. Including your own stars.
Oh no, not myself. I don't ever go like that. But, I mean, just, you'd be surprised. You have the record by Al Hibley? It's something like the stars fall raining and Something he's in jail and in cell.
Just hear that the last.
No, so that's okay.
Probably the blues.
It's the blues. Have you heard that?
I'm not sure if I know that one.
Yeah, Al Hillary. Yeah, it's real crazy. That's where I buy them. I hear one and I go to the store and get it thin. That way, you know, till about what he said. Something like the storm is shining and sun. And I'll sit here and some kind of red label. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Mr. Young. This is an experiment too. Oops. Try that again. This is a poem by a great poet named John O'Donohue. It's called A Blessing. Can you hear me? Thank you. May the light of your soul guide you. May the light of your soul bless the work you do with the secret love and warmth of your heart. May you see in what you do the beauty of your own soul. May the sacredness of your work bring healing, light, and renewal to those who work with you and to those who see and receive your work. May your work never weary you. May it release within you well springs of refreshment, inspiration, and excitement. May you be present in what you do. May you never become lost in bland absences. May the day never burden you. May dawn find you awake and alert, approaching your new day with dreams, possibilities, and promises. May evening find you gracious and filled. May you go into the night blessed, sheltered, and protected. May your soul calm, console, and renew you. You. You're being recorded and sampled, everything you might say. So that was a poem by John O'Donohue, who I think he started out as a Celtic monk, and then he left and just became what they probably refer to as a spiritual poet. And his most famous book is called Anam Cara. He's passed away since, but there's an amazing, what do you call it, podcast that you can listen to called On Being with Krista Tippett, right? And there's an unbelievable interview with him on that where he talks about just a better world, what sounds like a better world, but it's actually this world. And that's what this poem was. And if you like, I'll read it to you again. And if you give me your email address, I'll send it to you if you want. And this is it. It's a blessing by John O'Donohue. May the light of your may the light of your soul guide you. May the light of your soul bless the work you do with the secret love and warmth of your heart. May you see in what you do the beauty of your own soul. May the sacredness of your work bring healing, light, and renewal to those who work with you and those who see and receive your work. May your work never weary you. May it release within you well springs of refreshment, inspiration, and excitement. May you be present in what you do. May you never become lost in bland absences. May the day never burden you. May dawn find you awake and alert, approaching your new day with dreams, possibilities, and promises. May evening find you gracious and filled. May you go into the night blessed, sheltered, and protected. May your soul calm, console, and renew you. A Blessing by John O'Donohue. It's beautiful, right? Couldn't have said it better myself. Although I've tried. And well, let's do it. You guys mind the poetry and the music together and stuff like that? You know? Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna do a little thing. I'm gonna play a little tribute to Lester Young and Charlie Parker. We call them Prez and Bird. You know, and this is a poem that I wrote. I have a series of jazz poems that I wrote. I've written all kinds of poems, and this one was inspired by the special relationship between Lester Young and Billie Holiday, which is what we were listening to before the concert began, was them going back, way back. So I think Lester Young was born in 1909, you know, so that was 108 years ago. And Charlie Parker was born in 1920, I know that. So he's pushing up on 100 by now. But, you know, it's funny, we listen to all these old, you know, I listen to all these old great jazz saxophone players. You know, these names might sound familiar to you: Lester Young, Charlie Parker, Coleman Hawkins, Ben Webster. These are the guys with the greatest sounds and with the most original concepts, who all played in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and some of them even into the 60s and maybe even 1970s, a couple of them. And, you know, we think of them as old men, and we hear their sounds and they sound like older style, so we think of them as old. But the reality is, let me run this down for you. Ben Webster died at the age of 66. Coleman Hawkins died at the age of 63. Charlie Parker is well documented in the movie Bird and in many books and documentaries, died after a lifelong abuse at the age of 35. When they brought him to the hospital, the coroner estimated his age at 55. He was terribly overweight, and his body was shot due to a lifetime of heroin abuse. And Lester Young died at the age of 49. And I found all these things to be very, very surprising, because now I'm older than half of those guys were when they died. And I plan on being older than all of those guys. So, you know, and even, you know, I should say my father, you know, who was also a saxophone player from another era, his era didn't involve heroin, or his particular life didn't involve heroin, but cigarettes. He smoked cigarettes 3 packs a day since he was 12 years old, and he died at the age of 66. And just to speak with him, because that last poem brought up the term renewal, and one of his records is here in the store. It's called Renewal. It's a really beautiful album that he recorded about 1981, and it's here somewhere, right?
Is it next to the lamp?
Right here. Yeah. And there's a painting of him by a guy who's a famous children's book illustrator named Neil Waldman, who's an old family friend, and that's his second wife. I was an adult when they got married, so I never thought of her as my stepmom, you know, but we're family, you know. She lives in Israel, and it's a really beautiful album, and it's on sale here for only $7. And while we're talking about him and his saxophones, and he was an alto saxophonist, and in fact, somewhere around 1984, he well, in the '60s, he was the saxophone player on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, which you guys never even heard of, and I mean, you two, the rest of you have heard of it, and he had all kinds of endorsements, and and in fact, this saxophone was custom made for him. It looks a little decrepit now, but trust me, it's gold plated with a sterling silver bell with gold inlay, and the inside of the horn is gold, and it was made exactly to his specifications. And then in about 1984-85, he got an endorsement with Yamaha, and he wanted to ditch this horn because he didn't want this company to come back looking for it, so he gave it to me, and I've been playing it ever since, which means, how many years is that, Dan? 85, 32 years. So I've been playing it for a long time, longer than he played it, and every time that he would pick it up and play it, I was fortunate enough that I played with him. We played together a lot, and not all of it jazz, because he started the jazz school in New York City called the New School, and we played together with bands like the Spin Doctors and Blues Travelers and those guys. And you guys are too old to know them. You guys are too young to know them, but they're a pretty popular band. And they were rock and roll bands, like jam bands from the '90s. And every time you play my horn, he'd say, "I never should have given you this. It plays way better than my horn." And when I bring it to repairmen in New York, they say, "I hate to give this back to you because it's the best horn I've ever played." So it's something really, really special. And one of the reasons that it's special to me is that in about 1970, I guess it was 1970, my dad was playing at a festival in Montreux, Switzerland. And forgive my pronunciation, but I'm pretty sure it's Switzerland, right? So, he was playing with Chico Hamilton, who's a great jazz drummer. Later on, I got to play with Chico a couple of times in my career. He's the only guy who ever fired me twice, and we still love each other. He died at the age of 93 or 94 just recently, a couple of years ago. And my dad was there with Chico, and really famous alto saxophone player, post Charlie Parker, named Cannonball Adderley. You probably know him because he played on Kind of Blue, Miles Davis record. It was one of the most popular jazz records of all times. I don't know, in this store, probably not, but because it's like the hip jazz audience. But it's one of the most sold jazz records of all time, because there was, they used to have this Columbia Record Club where you pay a penny and you get 25 records, and one of the ones you always got that was a jazz offering was Miles Davis' Kind of Blue, and Dave Brubeck's Time Out, and Duke Ellington's Take the A Train or something like that.
Such Sweet Thunder.
Such Sweet
Thunder.
Yeah, was that available on the Columbia? And we used to have jazz musicians used to have a joke that said, "Hey, I got a record deal." I was like, "Right, really? That's great." Because back those days, there used to be record companies, and they'd give you a deal, and they'd give you money, you can make a record and put it out. Say, "Hey, I got a record deal." "Hey, that's great. What is this?" "Yeah, it's Columbia Records." "Say, really?" It's just like, "Yeah. If I send them a penny, they'll send me 20 records." And now they say, and Tom could actually say this, "Hey, my last record was a million seller." And you say, "Really?" You say, "Yeah, I've got 1 million of them in a cellar." So at any rate, so my dad was at this festival in Switzerland. I do have a point, and I'm getting to it. And Cannonball Adderley was there. He was playing the next night with his brother, and they had a famous song, you might recognize it, "Mercy, Mercy, Mercy," went like this. Except he had the biggest, most robust sound in the world. I mean, I have a big sound. He had a bigger sound. And it was a really big hit song. In jazz, back in those days, there was no jazz hits, rock and roll hits, country hits. It was just everything was on the same chart. Jazz and pop, was all the same thing. Because there was a time when jazz was the popular music of the day. Think Frank Sinatra. So he was going to play the next night, and there was this big jam session the night before Cannonball was playing, and my dad had already played, and there was this amazing old tenor player named Gene Ammons, and Gene had invited all the good musicians to come up and sit in with him. Cannonball's brother Nat, and Hampton Hawes on piano, who's a great piano player, undersung piano player from West Coast, and Dexter Gordon and Johnny Griffin and Gene Ammons, and all these guys were playing. And my dad and Cannonball were standing on backstage on the side of the stage watching this amazing show. And my dad said, "How come you're not out there playing?" And Cannonball said, "This happens." He said, "We're not playing until tomorrow, and my horn is back in the hotel, which is all the way across town. So he did invite me to play, but I can't." My dad said, well, look, we both play the same horns. They both had an endorsement with King, and they played King Super 20 silver sonic horns. He said, "Why don't you just play my horn? It'd be an honor," which it was. And Cannonball said, "Really, it's okay?" And he said, "Yeah." And Cannonball took his horn, which is now this horn, and stepped out on stage and played some of the most interesting and creative Cannonball Adderley that anybody's ever heard. And if you ask any alto saxophone player about that particular recording, everybody knows it. And that's the record right there. Boom. You don't even have to hold it up. There you go. So originally, Tom and I were planning on like 150 people being here and auctioning this record off and splitting the profits, right, Tom? And but instead, let's just celebrate it for a moment, and then we'll go into this little thing on Lester Young and Billie Holiday. Now, Lester and Billie both might be surprised to even those of you who are serious jazz fans, were both born in New Orleans, and when Lester was like, you could tell from listening to his voice before maybe that he's kind of like a gentle, soft soul, and he's like he said in the interview, there's a guy named Coleman Hawkins who was the previous great tenor saxophone before him, and Coleman Hawkins had a very gruff, muscular, masculine kind of style, and Lester Young was soft. He wore slippers to his gigs. He got kicked out of the Army because he smoked pot, and he got kicked out. They put him on kitchen patrol to cut potatoes, and he didn't do that very well. So they just kicked him out of the Army, and that was fine with him because he didn't want to fight anyway. He's just like a soft and gentle person. He said things in his own way. He just had his own, and which carried over into his playing too. So, like when he met you, instead of saying "How you doing?" or "How are you feeling?" he would say, "How are your feelings?" And he meant it. How are your feelings? And I learned this from Chico Hamilton, who played with Lester Young. And that's one of the beautiful things about jazz is that you're never more than half a generation away from pretty much the beginning, And I was really lucky because I got to play with Big Chief Russell Moore, who was the trombone player who played with Louis Armstrong. And I got to play with Sonny Chirac in the same lifetime. It's pretty amazing, and I'm not done yet, And so when Lester got to New York, Billie Holiday was there living with her mom, and they just kind of took each other under each other's wings, and there was this ongoing love affair. It had nothing to do with sex or partner kind of love, but it was just like you could hear it in their music. If you listen to them closely, you can see that it used to be like a singer would sing and then a sax player would play something, but with the two of them, it's like they had a conversation going all the time. They would just weave in and out of each other. It was the most beautiful thing you've ever heard, and nobody's ever done it as well since, and nobody ever did anything like it before that. Because before their music really was like Louis Armstrong in Dixieland, and that was nothing like the advanced, sophisticated, modern, cerebral, yet still soulful and guttural music that they were playing. So this poem is about them. Hopefully you can hear it. I'll try to do it quietly. I'll try to play quietly. Oh, no. Do it again. I could do this all day. I got a million of these things. Oh, I know what happened. Oh, cool. They're both there. I just forgot I turned the volume on. But they're completely out of sync with each other. Okay, we'll try this again. I could do this all night. Here we go. Good? Sure. Prez called everybody Lady something. Lady Basie for Count Basie. Lady Goodman for Benny Goodman. Lady Jones for Papa Joe Jones, the drummer. When something seemed insignificant, he would say la-di-da, with the A's trailing off, la-di-da. Almost the same as lady something, Lottie. It was the nuance. The one that stuck, Lady Day, showed his brilliance in taking things down to their essence, like a Gary Snyder poem. Like a Gary Snyder poem. By taking Billie Holiday's name and paring it down to his ecstatic rhythmic essential. Lady Day, Lady Holiday. These two solitary masters together intertwine. Her words, essence of verbal expression. His music, alighting, enlightening, pronking, which is what deer do when they bounce across the field. The result, sublime, otherworldly, a new higher form of light. Miss Day, in return, called her musical man Prez, like president, maybe like presents. What do you think? One more? Or yeah? Oh, yeah, one more. Okay. All right, let's see. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. I mean, I give you a little bit of Charlie Parker there. You know, I'm playing his, you know, the horn that he played. Charlie Parker also, you know, the Selmer saxophone is considered to be the king of the saxophones, but alto players prefer this. The King, it's actually called King, is the brand name, made in America, and these are made in Paris, and most tenor players prefer this one. So I mean, I got a million more things I can play, but I want to play this beautiful. Well, I don't want to say it's beautiful. I wrote it. It's not that beautiful, but there's a wonderful moment. I did a record about 10 or 11 years ago called Merge, and it was actually with a poet, and I created music around her poetry. And we were both teachers at Williams College in Massachusetts, is somewhere around here, and it's a state somewhere around here. I think it's a little east of here, and we did another record. I call it record, but you know, recording. And that one I have yet to release, but we were just talking about it today because it's not only with her and the band, but we had a lot of special guests, including Erik Mingus, the son of Charles Mingus, who's a poet and a bass player. Donald Lev, who was the street poet in the cult movie classic Putney Swope. Has anybody seen that aside from Tom?
Heard of it.
Oh, really? You saw it? All right. So Putney Swope, he played a street poet in the 1960s, and it's an amazing movie. It's about this black man who just decides that he's had enough of the corporate world, and he stands up against it, and he runs out into the street, and there's this guy reciting this crazy poetry. Well, anyway, he now lives like in upstate New York, and he's like a toothless old mountain man, but he writes the most beautiful poems. In fact, you know, there's a quality to his poetry that I find to be the most beautiful part of any kind of art is that it's almost like seeing a deer in the woods. Like you feel like it's so beautiful you shouldn't even be looking at it. you know, his poems are so personal, you feel like you shouldn't be listening, you know. And he wrote a suite of poems about his wife while she was dying. So you can imagine, you know. And he was famous for this other poem called Fall and Winter, which is basically a Russian novel in 20 lines. And it's incredible. And I could play it for you. I got it on my phone. And he said, oh, he goes, I played music with Charles Mingus in the 60s. It didn't really work out. And, you know, I did poetry. And I said, well, let's try it. And we sat around his table. He had a tiny little table in his little house in the middle of the mountains. Me and him and the poet. And he would read his poems and I'd play. And, like, he's reading these poems about his wife dying. And, like, all of us have just tears streaming down our faces. And he says, okay, I'll come to the recording session. Let's do it, you know. And we did it. So he was on there, and David Amram, who is sort of like Forrest Gump or Zelig, you know, like, but in real life. This is a guy who he's one of my mentors. He wrote the soundtrack to Manchurian Candidate, the original movie, and Splendor in the Grass. And he was the first composer in residence under Leonard Bernstein in the 1960s with the New York Philharmonic. He also has written ballets for every major orchestra and every major symphonies for every major orchestra, and he played French horn with Dizzy Gillespie and Charles Mingus. He was the piano player with Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg in 1957 when they started doing poetry and jazz together. And I'm sure I'm leaving. Oh, he introduced world music to America. I mean, he's just like, he's done everything. And now he's about, in November, he's turning 87, I think, or 88. And there's a documentary on him that I got to play. I'm on it because I just happened to be sitting at the right time, me and him and Kurt Elling. And the movie's called David Amram, The First 80 Years. And he's just an amazing force of nature. So he's on there. And Stephen Bernstein, my partner, from playing with Levon Helm and Stephen Burton, a number of bands that Stephen has. So that record should come out soon. And it's called Mystery Loves Company. And the guy who did the cover album for our first record was called Merge, which might even be a copy laying around here somewhere. And if you're interested, you can email me because I have copies of the CD, and I'll give Tom a commission for him. And I met this guy, and he's like an older guy, and he was a jazz drummer. He was also a painter. And when we met, he said, you know, we have a friend in common. And I said, who's that? He said, Lester Young. I said, Lester Young, of course. Who doesn't love Lester Young? He said, you know what I call people like us? And I said, no. He said, children of a Lester God. So when we put out the record, we had a big record, release party, and I wrote this song for him, and it's called Children of the Lester God. And what better day to play it than on Lester Young's birthday? So I'll play a couple of courses of it for you guys, and then send you on your merry way. I have to read it because also the first tune that I played with the 3 saxophones in the poem, the John O'Donohue poem, that's an original of mine that's never been recorded, called The Quickening. And yeah, now it's recorded, but it better not come out. It is copyrighted. I was like, wow, I wrote this song. I write a lot of songs that are like puzzle pieces, and I wrote this in 3 parts, and I was like, wow, I could do that with my sampling pedal, my nifty little trick, which I got in a box of Cracker Jacks. So don't give up hope. You might not win the Powerball, but you might get one of these things. So this is Children of a Lester God, and it really has him in mind. Thank you. And I supremely want to thank Tom and Jan for making this such an oasis in the world of all kinds of insanity and lunacy going on in these days, and to come here and to have the opportunity to create some beauty and to share some beauty and some stories and some life and some love. I hope you guys felt it, and I hope that you come back and support him. And if you don't have a record collection habit, you should have a record collection habit. And I had one for a really, really long time, and when I want to see my records, I'll come to the Bop Shop because they at least pass through here. Not nearly as many as he has here, but I'm glad that they ended up here, and now hopefully in new homes. But yeah, thank you for supporting live music and keep doing it. And thank you.